So welcome back to the channel. I'm Sunny, and in this episode, I'll show you how to get started with Azure DevOps, and then I'll show you how to create your first pipeline to deploy Terraform. So let's get started. So what we'll cover in this video is what is Azure DevOps, what are the basic key requirements to getting started, we'll run through a quick basic refresher of Terraform, and then we'll run through a demo of creating our first pipeline and deploying it. So what is Azure DevOps? So Azure DevOps is a suite of Microsoft products that basically allow you to plan, manage, and build your projects. So we'll run through the key services that are available. So Azure Boards is basically a way that you can manage your work items under a sort of Scrum/Kanban sort of methodology, so similar to Jira. And then you've got Azure Repos, which is just a private Git repo, so just a version control system like GitHub. And then you've got Azure Test Plans, which is basically a way to automate your browser-based tests. And then you've got Azure Artifacts, which is basically a way to create, host, and share your packages through your pipelines. And then you've got Azure Pipelines. So this is basically the orchestrator, so it allows you to build, test, and deploy your CI/CD pipelines. So we'll run through that later. So inside Azure DevOps, it's basically structured under organizations. And if you have the server version, it's known as collections, but they're one and the same, I believe. I haven't really looked at differences or not. But basically the organization is obviously something like the company tier, which has the higher level integrations and the permissions for access control. And then inside organizations, you basically create projects, and then the projects are basically a way to separate, say, teams or different projects where you house your boards, your repos, your pipelines, test plans, and artifacts. So it's just a lower level permission underneath that, where you can have multiple teams that work in different projects that have different permissions, and as well as different pipelines and code and whatever else. Okay, so the basic key configuration requirements to get you started. Obviously, you need a way to authenticate. So Azure Active Directory is a way you can integrate your single sign-on authentication. Don't disconnect the directory without a local account like I did and lock yourself out of the SaaS platform. Service connections is probably something that you'll use day to day. So service connections are basically your integrations into external systems. So this is where you store your service principals into Azure, as well as your personal access tokens to GitHub. So you can see there, I have a GitHub integration, and that little cloud one is basically my service principal for Terraform, which is for Azure. And then basically you've got Azure Pipeline Agents, or also known as build agents. Now this is not really a major thing in this demo because I'm using the hosted agent, which is hosted by Microsoft. So I'm using the free tier still. But you can basically have hosted agents, self-hosted agents is what they call them. So you can actually have agents inside your own VNets as well. So agents are basically what executes your jobs. So you definitely need agents. I'll just be using the Microsoft hosted agent for my demo. So let's talk about Azure pipeline structures. So the structure of Azure pipelines is all YAML based. It's actually quite easy to understand and read. You can use the task assistant as well, which sort of makes it easier. That's generally what I do. I don't really try to write YAML within VS Code from scratch. I generally use the task assistant because I always forget what the actual parameters are and the values. Within your pipeline structure, you basically have stages. So stages are basically a grouping of jobs, and then basically within jobs. So jobs are pretty much like if you have PowerShell scripts and you want to execute the as job parameter, which will parallelize the actual job functions itself. So they run in parallel and isolation. And then jobs are basically steps or tasks. So you'll see later on in the structure. I have it here. So if you look at this little screenshot, it shows stages. So those stages have jobs inside them. So if you look at this example here, you can see they have stages at the top, and then it breaks down into jobs and then tasks. And then you can see there's multiple stages as well. So it's a multi-stage pipeline. And then you can have dependencies from stage to stage as well. So I'll show that in the demo as well. So I thought I'd throw in a Terraform Basics refresher just on the fundamentals of the commands, because I'm going to use them inside my pipelines. I'll put a link to episode 4, building an Azure lab with Terraform. So if you're unfamiliar with Terraform, I suggest you go check that out. So I'm not going to really explain what Terraform is, but we'll talk about the commands. So basically you have an init. So an init will basically initialize your local workspace or your workspace in general, which will download, providers, any modules you're using, and basically set up your local workspace so you can run plans and executions. So then you got validate. So validate will basically validate your Terraform syntax. It's pretty straightforward. It'll tell you if there's errors or not. And then you've got a plan. So a plan will basically execute your code based on the state, and the state will be pretty much a snapshot of what's out in Azure. And so it'll basically tell you what the difference is. And then an apply will obviously execute the code. Something that's different that you might not be familiar with is Terraform has a state file, which is basically how it manages real-world environment in Azure. So it basically has all the information in a state file of what is currently active or what is deployed in Azure. So when you run a local plan, it basically does a comparison on your code. And if there's any differences from your code to the state, it'll tell you that it's going to make changes. And then when you apply, that's how it tells you. So Terraform will manage the state file. But the reason why I have that in this is because when you run in pipelines, you're running Terraform in a local state, but the problem is it's not going to save your state anywhere. So what you're going to need to do is have a remote, use remote storage or somewhere to store your state. So then that way you have a consistent state file all the time, as opposed to trying to run. Because if you didn't store your state remotely or at a central location, every time you ran a plan, it wouldn't know about what was in Azure. So you just keep getting errors and conflicts saying objects exist and whatever else. So as part of the pipeline, because every time you run a job, it kind of runs in a container, I guess, and it doesn't know about Azure. So you have to have a state file that's persistent. So then it can always refer to that state file to know what's actually in Azure. Or else you just get a whole bunch of errors saying objects already exist. So I thought I'd throw that in because that's slightly a bit different to maybe what people are used to. And then let's talk about the demo. So the demo, I'll run through the Azure DevOps actual interface itself. We won't create a new project because I've already got a project, but we'll create a new pipeline. I'll run through the configuration that you need, the Terraform extension, which is what I use as well, and I'll talk more about that. And then we'll create a pipeline and we'll run the pipeline. Okay, so this is Azure DevOps, and you can see here I'm at the organizational level. So let's run through a high-level overview of the organization, because what I want to show you is the Terraform extension. So if you look here, as I spoke about Azure Active Directory, so I've got that linked into Azure Active Directory already. And obviously, we've got default permissions here. If you look at agent pools here, I'm just using the hosted agent. But what I wanted to show you was extensions. You can see here I've got the Azure Pipelines Terraform task by Charles Zip. So if you wanted to install it, obviously you would go browse Marketplace, and you could just search for Terraform. And then you'll see the one you want is from Charles Zip here. Then you can basically just install it. So obviously I'm using the SaaS platform already. So if I go incognito mode. So if you look here, you can basically just go to the Azure DevOps site of Microsoft, which is azure.microsoft.com/en-au or wherever you are. And then services, and then DevOps, which basically there's a start for free. So I'm currently using the free tier. But yeah, that's basically the organizational settings. You don't really need to know much else, I guess, from this point of view, but feel free to go through here and check it out. Okay, so if I go into the projects, you can see here there's a whole bunch of services. Now, I'm not really going to talk about all these other services. We're primarily going to focus on pipelines, but feel free to go through here and venture through, all the services. So pipelines is really what we're going to look at. I've already got a demo here, but we're going to create a new pipeline. But first, let's go into project settings. So there was a little thing that I saw. Now, I don't know if this is the case, but there's a project visibility here, which you can have private and public. So originally I had it set as private, but then I noticed down here, you've got agent pools and then you've got parallel jobs. So the free tier gives you one parallel job. So if we do multiple jobs, right, it might take a lot longer to execute. But if you look through here, it's got public projects, and then it gives you 10. So I switched it over to public projects. So I'd be interested to see how that actually works. But I'm not really running multiple jobs anyway. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. But let's walk through service connections, which is really, the bigger picture here is, assuming that you have permissions and everything sorted out. So obviously you can look into that yourself. But service connections here, I've already got 2 set up. So I've got one into GitHub already, and then I've got a service principal. So episode 4, I've got a script, which is here, I think, to create a service principal. So basically, you can just download this script. I'll put links below. This will create a service principal, apply contributor, and it creates a providers.tf file. But you're not actually going to need that for this case. But if you just have a look. I think I noticed something here. You can basically go create a new service connection, and then you go Azure Resource Manager. And then there's Service Principal Automatic, and then Service Principal Manual. Now, I don't know if this is 100%, but I believe Service Principal Automatic will only apply permissions to a resource group. As where if you do it manually, then obviously you can assign the permissions yourself. So the one I have set up here is actually a manual one, and I'm just using the standard secrets. So if you see this, I'm just using a standard service principal with a secret, and that's it. So I believe when you do auto, it only limits it to the actual resource group. So it depends on how you plan on setting it up, but that service principal I've already created. And then I've just used OAuth to basically add my GitHub repo. So obviously that's where your pipelines and your code will be stored. And that's all I'm really going to cover inside a project, because I think you can venture and navigate through yourself on other things, because I'm not really going to talk about permissions, notifications, service hooks. Feel free to venture. Obviously, there's a free tier for Azure DevOps, so you can basically go in and venture. If you're using server is slightly different. I noticed the interface for creating pipelines is actually the IntelliSense is a lot better on the SaaS version than server, but that makes sense. So let's go through and create our first pipeline. So if you just go new pipeline, so keep in mind I've already installed the Terraform extension. So we're just going to create a new pipeline. So I'm just going to choose the repo, so episode 12, and we'll just go new starter pipeline. So what we're going to do is just clean up this text. Now, you can have triggers. I'm not really going to talk too much about triggers, but obviously a trigger will track changes, I guess. So in this case, it will basically track changes on the master branch on my repo, and if it changes, it will basically trigger a run. So what we're going to do is just, for the sake of the demo, we're going to set that to none. You also need to set You also just need to set PR equals none as well. It's just so when you initiate a PR, it doesn't trigger as well. So we're just going to change this pool to Windows. Doesn't really matter. It just depends on what commands you're going to run. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this text as well. So we're going to start with stages. Whoops. So stages are obviously groupings of jobs, and then jobs are groupings of tasks or steps. So what you need to do, this autocomplete. So we're going to add a stage. So you'll find with YAML is it's quite specific around how you space things. Everything has to be exact, or else it's going to error out. So you'll find that. So let's call this. See, it doesn't like that I don't have a space. It's a Terraform. We'll just call this Terraform validate. and then basically, this auto tabbing. And then we're going to do is we can add a display name. Display name. Sorry, I'm typing and not looking at the keyboard. Trying to be smart or cool. So we'll just give this a name. So we'll just say Terraform validate and init. And then we're just gonna, you can see the autocomplete here. So we'll just go jobs is what we want. So then we're gonna create a job. And then what we can do is under jobs, oops. I don't know why it has no suggestion, but basically you need to create steps under a job. Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the video. Thank you all for the support so far. I just signed up to buymeacoffee.com. So now you can show your appreciation by buying me a coffee. So let me do you a favor and I'll pause the video right now. Just kidding. Links are below. Enjoy the rest of the video. And then this is where you can create your tasks, right? And then you've got your task assistant here. So if you just type in Terraform, there's two parts. Obviously, you got the installer, and then you got the CLI. So the CLI is going to be the commands, obviously, and the installer, it's going to download Terraform. So I'll just leave it as default, which is going to be the latest. So you can see here it's automatically structured it, and then my error's gone because I now have tasks. So as you can see, you got stages, then you got jobs, then you got job inside that job, and then you got steps, and then you got tasks inside the steps. So that's the standard structure. It doesn't really change much, but it depends on if you want multi-stage pipelines or not or what. Keep in mind that jobs. So if you think about, like I said, jobs in PowerShell, they run in parallel, right? So when you're running jobs, you need to keep in mind that this is, I guess, the world of serverless and container-based execution. So you need to basically set up these jobs so it has all the libraries, all of the tools and everything that it actually needs to run. So if you're going to run multiple jobs, then an example is you need a Terraform installer each time, because unless you're going to put it somewhere else in a remote share or something, you can put in artifacts, right? And things like that. But still, you need to pretty much set up the job so it can execute, it has all the tools and libraries to execute what it needs. And then if we just go to Terraform again, so you want to do the CLI. So I've actually already created the code, by the way. So the code that I'm using, why is this so big? 300. So the code I'm using is actually from my last episode. I think it was episode 9. Let me have a look. It was episode 9 where we're basically using the TF-vars file. So episode 9 here. So I already got the code here. So I'm using that here. So this is already set up, ready to go. I've obviously refactored it a little, but that's going to be the code that my pipeline will execute. So I'm not actually going to write any Terraform code here because I've already written it. So I'm only going to write the pipeline to actually execute the Terraform code. So you can see here. So we're going to add a task to basically do an init. So you need to do an init. This is the default directory that you always want to use. There's multiple directories, so I'll provide a link. You've got default working directory. You've got default, I think, build directory, and then there's another one for artifacts. I think it's default download directory or something. I'll put a link below, but you should be familiar with, I guess, the default paths. So when you're trying to execute scripts or you're trying to call files, it's handy to set the working directory or know what that working directory is in case you need to reference it. Bit rusty here, but I believe I need -var file. So I'm basically going to add my dev file here. So it's main.tf, I think. This is where we can configure our remote state. So normally when you're setting this up, if you look at other Docker out there, you always need to set up a resource group and then a storage account. Now, if you use this extension, if it's possible to use the extension, I would recommend it because it just saves a bit of time. But obviously some people like to run all the commands themselves, so don't use any extensions or set things up themselves. So it's really your own personal preference, but you can see here that I can actually call the service principal here. It gives me an option. And then this is a fantastic option, which is create backend if it doesn't exist. So it says if not exists. And then basically you can put in your resource group, your location, and your storage account. So this thing will actually create it. So I'll just put something as a test here. So we'll just call it, I don't know, RG dash, emu dash, say, east US dash 1 or something, just as an example. So we'll just go east US. So I'm not actually going to run this, by the way, because I've already got one set up. But I'm just showing you, I guess, how to set this up. So if we just say SA, so account, so just giving it whatever name. So, and then you need to basically have a container name. So we'll just call it TF state. So this will create a container in the storage account. And then you need a key. So the key will actually be the name of the Terraform state file, I believe. So if we just call this dev-tf state, and then we just make sure that I'm in the right place before I click on add. So you can see here, I've just added it. And what you can do is you can highlight it all and just tab it. So you can see that it's complaining. So I'll tab it again. And you can see here that it's gone because it aligns up now. But this is pretty much how I generally create pipelines, because I don't know all these parameters. And then once you have your baseline, you can modify them, update them, copy them, and whatever else. But I like to use the task assistant. But yeah, so you can see here I've just done the init, and then because I'm using the code from my episode 9, I have a tfvars file, so that's actually tfvars, not .tf. And then it's basically going to use the service principal that I showed earlier, and then it's going to, this option here, ensure that the backend exists. So if it doesn't exist, it's going to create it. And I'm passing through a resource group, the location, and a storage account, and then obviously the storage account container name that's going to create if it doesn't exist, and then the state file name. So that's basically it. And so then if we just go through and just create multiple tasks, so obviously we've done the init, we'll do a validate. So let's go Terraform CLI. So validate's going to be obviously less options. So validate is going to validate our code, so I'm just going to add it. So you can see here. So I'm just going to tab that across, and you can see there. So that's basically going to be a validate. So what I'm going to do is we'll flick over to the demo code that I've done, which is going to have multiple stages, which will basically have a validate, a plan, and then an apply. Yeah, originally I wasn't going to do a multi-stage pipeline. I was just going to show you one pipeline with just the single job with multiple steps. But I basically read something from ThomasThornton.Cloud. So he creates a lot of good content around all this DevOps stuff. And I sort of borrowed parts of his example, which is just to do the multi-stage pipeline and map dependencies. So I definitely recommend you check out this blog. I'll put the link below. But Thomas Thornton, if you're listening, thanks for the content. And let's go back. So I'm not going to save this because I've already got another pipeline written here. So let's go to my pipeline. So it looks like it errors out. And it's funny because the way that it works, the extension will actually error out if the storage count doesn't exist. But if you open up this pipeline, so I've already created this pipeline. You can see I've set PR and trigger to none as well, just so I can manually invoke it. We're basically using the Windows agent pool as well. You can see here I've actually got multiple stages. I've got the Terraform validate. And you can see here, I've got basically a bunch of, we've got one job, which will basically run a task, which will install the Terraform installer. And then it will basically go through and configure the backend. So you can see here, there's multiple ways that you can configure the Terraform backend. Now, if you're using the extension, obviously the extension has limitations, so I've encountered some. An example is I was trying to use the managed service identity of a VM to basically write to a storage account, and things are quite restricted at work, so I ran into a whole bunch of RBAC related problems. Obviously the extension doesn't allow me to define this, so I tried to write this whole block as well, and that didn't work, but it could have been an RBAC problem. But in regards to this demo, it's pretty straightforward. So the backend configuration is going to use the service principal that I spoke about before. And then it's got this ensure backend equals true, which means if it doesn't exist, it will create it. Now, normally you would manually create these objects, so resource group and storage account, before you'd run any pipelines against, you need somewhere to actually store a state file, so it needs to exist before you can actually do an initialization or an init. So basically I've got an RG here, and then the location and the storage name. So these don't actually exist. So you can see here, there's nothing. And basically it's going to create a container called tf states, and then a dev dash tf state will be the file name, which is, it's called a key here. And then it's basically going to use the dev main.tfvars, which is from episode 9. So you can see here I've already written it. Now these obviously align with the RG name in the environment, so I've made sure that they all align just for the demo, because we're going to create the storage account in the RG, so they just need to align. So once we've done the init, we're going to run a validate. So validate will just make sure syntaxing is okay. I don't know if we need these command line options for the validate actually, so I'm just going to take that out. And then what you can see is I'm creating another stage. So I've actually got a dependency map to the stage above. So that stage needs to actually execute before this one executes. But then I've added a condition, which is from Thomas Thornton's example. Thanks, Thomas. And you can see here that the condition is if the stage above needs to succeed before this one will execute. And then you can see here, because it's a separate job, so the job will potentially run on a different agent, which is why you need to reset up everything again. So I've got basically this Terraform installer again. Then I've got the init, so the same init, because it needs to initialize again. And then the plan, so the plan will actually inject the file itself, and then it'll tell you, I guess, what it's going to do. And then we've got the apply. So this obviously links to the one above, so it has a dependency as well. And that's basically it. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this. But what I wanted to show was I mentioned there's a validate option here. So validate is super handy. So it tells you if there's any errors or anything like that. But as you can see, most of this stuff automatically will just error out. So you can see there, it's very specific. You need, specific indents. So you can kind of figure that out because it always complains. But yeah, so if I, change anything, it just complains. So yeah, that's basically it. So let's run this pipeline. So this will actually commit it into GitHub when you save your changes. So I've got pipelines here, and this is the one I'm modifying. So you can see it's already here. So let's go back to the pipeline, and we're going to run it, and hopefully it works. So let's see, because I've run this, but then I had to change attributes, and then I added the stages. So you can see here, this is, what a multi-stage pipeline will look like. So it's executing, and then if I click on it, you'll see here that it's basically in a queue. So it's waiting for an agent. So you can see here, it's doing it now. So it's going to run through every single one of those tasks or those steps. So it's checking out the GitHub repo. So that's what it's going to build. So you can see here, it's going to install Terraform, and then it's going to do the init. So this will probably error out, but then it will continue on error. So if you have a look. Okay, so you can see it's logged into Azure now. And then it's gone and created the repo. The resource group. We'll just wait. Let's go back to this. So this is the error I was talking about, but that's because it doesn't exist. So you'll see here, that it says storage account not found, creating. That could probably operate a little better, but at least it's automating, I guess, the backend configuration. So you can see here it's created the storage account because it didn't exist. Super handy. And then you can see it's initializing the backend, which, that just looks like a local plan. Then it's downloading all the providers. And now it's doing a validate. So it looks like maybe that did work, which is great. So if we go back to the resource groups, you should see I've got the new RG and I should have a storage account. I should. Maybe I don't. Where's the storage account? So there's no storage account, but this thing finished. So we might just need to give it time because that was successful with the storage account creation. So let's go back. Yep, so there's a storage account. So I just want to show you the containers and then the TF states, and then you can see your state file. Now I'm not going to touch this just yet because there's basically this lease option, I guess, which when the file is open, it actually creates a lease and it locks it, which is super handy if you're working in a team environment. That's going to save you from multiple people trying to overwrite the file. So let's go back to our pipeline. Just wanted to show you the storage account was created. So it's going to do the init again. You can see this time, obviously, it didn't error out because it got created the first time. It's going to do a plan now. So the plan should tell us that it's going to deploy all the infrastructure, which will be what I built in episode 9, which is, I think, a virtual machine, a key vault, storage. I'm not doing the storage count anymore. I took it out. But basically it's going to deploy a log analytics workspace and everything else. So if we go look at this plan here, you can see it's going to deploy the key vault. It's going to put a secret in there, which is the admin password. It's going to put the workspace key there, configure some data sources on the log analytics workspace. And then it's going to basically deploy a virtual machine. So add the NIC and everything else, subnets, virtual networks, I believe. It's going to basically deploy a whole lab. So you can see there. So 19 objects. And also the extension by default will actually do a Terraform apply and it will automatically do the auto approve value. So you don't actually, because obviously this is running through a pipeline and it's going to be a job on an agent. You can't interact with it. So obviously you can't say yes, build. So by default, the nature of this extension is the apply will be set to automatically apply. So you can see here, auto approve. So it's going to auto do it because you can't interface with this. It's basically doing the apply, and you can see here it's basically going through and building now. So you can see there it's gone through multiple stages. So glad that worked because most demos don't. And yeah, so we'll just wait and I'll come back when this is finished. Actually, while that's building, I just wanted to talk about those predefined variables that are commonly used. So it's a good idea to get familiar with these because when you're executing jobs and things like that, trying to figure out directories and where you are and what to execute can be a bit tricky. So if you just have a look at if I just search for directory, you can see here, there's actually a build.artifact staging directory. So that's generally a directory that's used. It should tell you. If you're using artifacts and you pull down artifacts, they're actually stored in that directory. But you can see here there's a build directory. It's just a good idea to be familiar with these. So you got the build.sources directory, which is one of the default directories, and then you got a staging directory. So it's always good to understand what these directories are because you may need to reference the working directory when you're executing scripts and things like that. Let's just go back to the pipeline. So it's still building. So we'll just come back when that's done now. Okay, so we're back. So that job's finished now. Now, before I run through this, I'm just going to do a couple of things. So I'm going to execute this again because I want to show you that, what the pipeline does against the existing environment which has been deployed. So theoretically, by having the state file in a remote state, it should basically go, hey, I don't need to build anything. So we're just going to run this and then we're just going to jump over to the Azure side of things to validate what's been built. So we'll just make sure that's okay. So that's started. So if we just go through the resource group, so I'm not going to go through and validate everything. I've built this so many times, but you can see here it's deployed everything. You can see here I've deployed the Key Vault the log analytics. It's gone and deployed everything. So I just wanted to show you. If you go through containers here, you look at this state file. If we just open it, see how there's an acquire lease. Now I'll just download it. Just going to open this state file I just downloaded. Okay, so this is what the state file looks like. So you can see here, state files have plain text strings. That's the local admin password there. Not so great, as well as some other details that I guess are quite sensitive. But yeah, so this is a state file that I just downloaded. So it's gone and created that. So obviously, you generally have different state files for different environments. You don't want them overlapping. But yeah, so that's all I wanted to show. Pretty much the build. But now if we just go back to pipelines, so you can see this thing's still running. So theoretically, this apply should basically make no changes. So theoretically, you would push code when you're making changes, go through the PR review, merge it, and then run this pipeline. Or you can configure the triggers to update or to execute every time there's a PR or a master branch change. So let's just let this run again. So you can see here, it's doing the acquiring lock state again. It's just done the plan or the apply, and it says there's no changes, right? So it didn't do anything again. As expected, no changes to infrastructure. And that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much what pipeline looks like. So you can see here, I've got the 3 stages are successful. And you can also schedule your pipelines as well, by the way. There's a cron scheduler, so I'll link that below. So that's Azure Pipelines. Code again is all in GitHub, so episode 12, you'll be able to basically download it and execute it all, and hopefully it just works. So I'll probably do a part 2 video of Azure Pipelines down the track, which will talk about variable groups. I'll introduce other tools and things to actually validate your code, so then you can make sure that there's no security holes or anything in your code, and do other checks. So hopefully this video turns out okay, because I took a bit of a gamble. I'm shooting with natural light. It's a cloudy day. You can see it's constantly been changing throughout. But I thought I'd live on the edge a little. So don't forget, subscribe to the channel. I think you got to hit the little bell notification so you get notifications when I publish videos. Also available on all podcasting platforms. So if you want to listen to the audio only version as well, which is what I do when I go for walks. So my next video will probably be a Terraform Cloud video. And then I'll look at maybe doing an Azure Pipelines part 2. All links will be below. Code is in GitHub. And yeah, I'm signing out. So see ya.